What would you do if, before you even sat down, your boarding pass was ripped in half? What if you were told to move without a reason while others watched in silence? 13-year-old Noah Ellington wasn't looking for trouble. He was just trying to get to Washington, D.C. for a youth forum, carrying nothing but his worn backpack and the quiet strength his grandfather taught him. But when a flight crew singled him out and tore up his assigned seat, they set off a chain of events no one saw coming. A single decision in the sky, a system designed to protect passengers, and a $1.7 billion freeze that shook the entire airline industry. How did a boy with no power force the most powerful people in aviation to answer for their actions? And what happened when they tried to silence him? This is not just a story about a seat on a plane. It's about dignity, rules, and the cost of ignoring them. So sit back, keep your seatbelt fastened, and get ready for the full story. If you believe in justice, in truth, and in standing your ground, make sure to like, share, and subscribe because this flight is about to take off. The morning light at Redwood International Airport had a particular way of spilling across the terminal floors. It was soft and gold, almost like it was trying to reassure the rush of travelers that the day would unfold without trouble. You could hear the pull of suitcase wheels, the hum of coffee machines, the muffled voices of business calls already in motion. But at Gate 42, trouble was already quietly finding its way in. Noah Ellington stood in line, hands tucked into the front pocket of his navy hoodie. The hoodie wasn't anything fancy. A few threads near the cuff had frayed, and the fabric had softened from years of wear. Slung over his shoulder was a silver-gray canvas backpack, its straps polished smooth by time. Inside were the things that mattered for his trip: a carefully packed tablet, printed research notes, and a notebook with pages crammed full of ideas for the National Youth Policy Forum in Washington. D.C. Ahead of him, the boarding area for Flight 726 buzzed with the muted energy of first-class travelers. Men in pressed suits scrolled through emails. A woman in a crimson blazer adjusted her scarf while speaking into an earpiece. Somewhere behind Noah, a child's laughter broke through the steady background noise, a small reminder that not everyone in the terminal was thinking about deadlines. When it was Noah's turn at the counter, he stepped forward and handed over his boarding pass with quiet confidence. Arthur Ellington, his grandfather, had insisted he fly first class so he'd have space to work on the presentation that could open doors for his future. It wasn't a free upgrade, and it wasn't a favor. The ticket had been paid for in full. Veronica Keene, the lead flight attendant, took the pass without looking at Noah at first. Her uniform was immaculate, the dark navy fabric pressed to sharp edges, her blonde hair pulled into a precise bun. But when her eyes dropped to the name and the seat number on the boarding pass, her expression shifted. Her polite smile thinned into something harder. "This cabin isn't for unaccompanied minors," she said. Her voice was calm, but her tone was the kind that made your skin prickle. Noah blinked. "I have a paid first-class seat," he replied. His voice stayed steady, almost careful. He could feel a few pairs of eyes turned toward them from the line. Veronica's fingers tightened on the ticket. Without a pause, she tore it cleanly in half. The sound of paper splitting was sharper than it should have been in the middle of the morning quiet. Half the ticket slipped from her hand and fluttered to the floor. A man holding a coffee cup froze mid-sip. A woman in a green dress clutched her purse a little closer. Somewhere near the boarding door, a younger flight attendant, Eli Moreno, stopped checking a passenger's documents and glanced over, his brow furrowing. "You'll be seated in economy," Veronica said, matter of fact. "We have an open row at the back." Noah didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at her, the way his grandfather had taught him to when words weren't enough. Arthur Ellington's voice echoed in his head. You don't have to meet volume with volume. Stillness can be louder. Behind him, Samuel Price, a retired Navy captain with a weathered face, muttered under his breath, "That's not right." The man beside him, Franklin Rhodes, a journalist with a tablet already in hand, lifted his device and began recording. And in the space of those few seconds, a kind of ripple moved through the gate area. It wasn't noisy, not yet, but it was charged. Noah bent slightly, picked up the fallen half of his ticket, and slid both torn pieces into the front pocket of his hoodie. Veronica's expression didn't change. "Please step aside," she said. "We need to keep the boarding process moving." Eli Moreno took a step closer, as if he might speak, but he caught himself. Rules, he knew, could be tricky to navigate when you wore the uniform. He settled for making eye contact with Noah, the kind that said, "I see what's happening here." Noah let out a slow breath. His mind was already weighing the options, moving through the checklist his grandfather had drilled into him. Is this just an inconvenience, or is it a breach of dignity? Is it an accident, or is it a choice they're making about who belongs where? He thought about the tool he carried in his backpack, not a physical one, but digital. The Sky Guardian Index app. Only a handful of people in the country could access it. It wasn't meant for convenience, and it wasn't for personal revenge. It was designed for moments exactly like this, when a passenger's rights had been compromised and the normal channels would be too slow to matter. Arthur Ellington had given him the clearance himself, 2 days before, sliding the laminated credential card across the desk in his study. The old leather smell of the room, the golden lamplight catching on the frames of Arthur's reading glasses. Noah could still see it clearly. "This isn't a toy," his grandfather had said. "It's a lever. Used right, it can move things no one else can. Used wrong, it can break more than it fixes." Noah's fingers itched toward his backpack now, but he didn't reach for it yet. He wanted to be sure. Behind him, Franklin Rhodes whispered into his phone's microphone. "Gate 42 Redwood International. First-class boarding pass just ripped up. Kids maybe 13. Paid ticket. This is going to blow up." Veronica had already turned back to her boarding list, calling the next passenger forward without looking at Noah again. For her, the matter was over. For Noah, it was just beginning. He stepped to the side, letting another traveler hand over their pass. Eli caught his eye again. The silent question there, "Are you going to let this happen?" Noah swallowed. His heart was steady, but his mind was a storm. He could walk onto that plane, take the back row economy seat, and still get to Washington. He could let the moment pass. He could let Veronica's decision stand. Or he could press the lever. And if he did, the weight of the entire system would shift not just for him, but for every passenger who might be next. He stood there for another heartbeat, the gold light from the terminal windows catching the edge of his face. Then he reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out his phone. Noah held the phone in his hand for a moment, the smooth glass screen catching the light from the terminal windows. He could feel the warmth from his palm pressing into it, and with that warmth came the weight of the choice he was about to make. The boarding line moved in slow increments, each beep of a scanned ticket sounding sharper than it should. He was standing still, but inside, every thought was moving fast. He glanced at the torn boarding pass in his other hand. The paper felt lighter now, like its worth had been stripped away along with the seat number that had once been printed on it. The halves didn't fit perfectly together anymore. The tier had jagged edges. He ran his thumb along them, as if confirming to himself that the damage was real, not imagined. From the corner of his eye, he saw Veronica Keene finish boarding another passenger. She didn't glance his way. It was as though she'd erased him from her mental manifest. To her, the matter was settled, and his place was at the back of the plane. He felt a flicker of heat in his chest, not from anger, but from the quiet awareness that this was the kind of moment his grandfather had always talked about. A point on the line where you either speak up or stay silent, and whichever you choose becomes part of who you are. He remembered that night in Arthur Ellington's study 2 days ago. His grandfather had been at his desk, reviewing a thick folder marked with the Sky Guardian Index insignia. The desk lamp cast a circle of amber light over the wood grain, and Noah had sat opposite, his hands resting on his knees. Arthur had looked up, his expression serious in that way that always meant the conversation was important. "Noah, the Sky Guardian Index is not about convenience," Arthur had said, his voice low. "It is not there to make your life easier. It's there to protect the integrity of air travel when the system fails to protect you. You will be one of the youngest people to ever carry a clearance credential. That means if you use it, you better be certain the moment demands it." In that study, Noah had nodded. He had thought about scenarios, imagined emergencies, pictured rare but clear injustices. He hadn't thought about a torn ticket at a boarding gate, but here it was, real and in front of him. Eli Moreno approached quietly, breaking through his thoughts. His voice was low enough that it wouldn't carry beyond the two of them. "If you're thinking about challenging her," he said, "now would be the time. Once you're on the plane, she can make it harder to push back." Noah studied his face. Eli's eyes held no hint of mockery, only a guarded encouragement. He seemed like someone who had seen rules bent before and knew when they were worth testing. "What happens if I don't?" Noah asked. Eli hesitated. "You'll sit in economy. Maybe lose some prep time for whatever you're flying to D.C. for, but she'll think she was right to do it. And next time, it could be someone else." That landed heavier than Noah expected. The words, "next time," it could be someone else, had a way of reaching past his pride and tapping into something deeper. He thought about the other kids he knew from school. Kids who didn't have a grandfather with Senate connections. Kids who wouldn't have any recourse if they were told they didn't belong in a seat they'd paid for. He turned the phone over in his palm. The Sky Guardian Index icon sat in the bottom right corner of the home screen, small and unassuming. Most people wouldn't recognize it. Most wouldn't know what it could do. Behind him, Samuel Price shifted his weight, leaning slightly closer. "Son, I've been in situations where you get one shot to stand your ground. Make sure you take it if it's the right one." Noah met his eyes and gave a small nod. His pulse was steady now. He thought about what Arthur would say if he were standing here, seeing the halves of the ticket in Noah's hand. He imagined his grandfather's measured voice. "Do what your conscience tells you, and make sure you can defend it later." He unlocked the phone and tapped the Sky Guardian icon. The screen changed to the deep blue interface, the emblem of the index at the top. Beneath it, His photo taken at the credentialing session stared back at him. There was only one button at the center of the screen, Request Ethics Hold. He didn't press it yet. Instead, he swiped to the side and tapped the Call Clearance Authority option. Arthur answered on the second ring. "Noah," his grandfather said, voice calm but alert. "What's going on?" "She ripped my boarding pass," Noah said quietly. "Said first class isn't for unaccompanied minors. My ticket was paid for." He could feel the hum of conversation behind him, the shuffle of passengers still boarding. Arthur was silent for a moment. Then he asked, "Are you certain this isn't a misunderstanding that can be fixed without the index Noah thought about that?" He thought about Veronica's flat tone, her lack of interest in hearing his explanation. "No," he said. "She's already moved on to boarding the next passenger. She's not going to undo it." "All right," Arthur replied. "Then you know what to do. Code 91 is cleared." The call ended, and Noah stared at the screen. His thumb hovered over the Request Ethics Hold button. Around him, the gate agent announced final boarding for first class. The sound was both urgent and distant in his ears. Veronica called for the next passenger, not looking at him. Eli lingered a few feet away, his eyes flicking between Noah and the boarding lane. Samuel Price stood with his arms folded, watching like he already knew what was about to happen. Noah pressed the button. The screen flashed once, then a confirmation prompt appeared. "Confirm Ethics Breach Report. Gate 42 Redwood International, Flight 726, minor passenger displacement. Confirm or cancel." He hit confirm. The progress bar that followed was small and quiet. Nothing dramatic, but Noah knew that within seconds, the Sky Guardian Index would send an alert through the airline's internal network, and from there to the Federal Aviation Administration. He slipped the phone back into his hoodie pocket and stepped to the side. It began subtly. A tone sounded at the gate desk, not the pleasant chime of boarding, but a sharper, more deliberate note. Veronica glanced toward the monitor, her brow furrowed. Then another sound, softer but impossible to miss, rolled through the background. It came from the devices in the pockets of crew members, from the tablets they carried, a coded alert that only airline staff would recognize. Eli looked down at his, and his eyes widened just slightly before he masked the reaction. Passengers started murmuring. "What's happening?" a woman asked. "Is there a delay?" someone else chimed in. Veronica straightened her shoulders, tapping at the screen in front of her. Her eyes flicked to Noah for just a fraction of a second, then back to the monitor. She tapped again, harder this time, as if repetition could make the alert go away, but it wouldn't. Not now. Noah stood still, letting the moment settle. The lever had been pulled. Now the system would move. The murmur at Gate 42 began to shift. It wasn't the restless sound of travelers waiting for boarding. It was sharper, quieter in some ways, but laced with curiosity. Passengers who had been immersed in emails or scrolling news feeds were now glancing up, sensing a change in the air. They didn't know what had just happened, but they could feel it. Veronica Keene tapped the monitor again, a crease deepening between her brows. She turned slightly toward the jet bridge and made a small motion with her hand. A uniformed security officer, stationed just beyond the boarding door, stepped forward. His expression was neutral, but his body language was the kind that suggested he was expecting to escort someone away. Noah felt his pulse in his fingertips, but his breathing stayed even. The Sky Guardian Index wasn't designed for dramatic confrontation. It was built for quiet authority, for shifting the balance of power without shouting. He knew what came next. The system would trigger a tiered review protocol, flagging Flight 726 as subject to an ethics hold. But to most people here, the process would be invisible for the next minute or two. The security officer stopped in front of Veronica. "Problem?" he asked. She tilted her head toward Noah. Passenger was reassigned to economy due to age. "We'll need to clear him from this area." Before Noah could speak, a voice cut in from behind. "You mean the kid whose ticket you ripped up?" It was Franklin Rhodes, the journalist, his tablet angled just so, the camera recording both faces. He didn't shout, but the way he said it carried across the boarding area. A few passengers shifted closer, not enough to crowd, but enough to make it clear they were paying attention. Samuel Price stepped up as well, his voice steady and deep. "That boy paid for his seat. I saw the pass before you tore it." Veronica's jaw tightened. She clearly didn't like the attention. "Sir, this is airline policy. Unaccompanied minors cannot travel in first class without a guardian." Eli Moreno spoke for the first time, his tone careful. "With respect, Ms. Keene, that's not entirely accurate. The policy allows for it if the ticket is paid in full and the passenger is traveling for official purposes, which he is." Veronica shot him a look, sharp enough to make most crew members shrink. But Eli didn't waver. Noah stayed silent. He didn't need to join the volley of words. His role now was to let the system he had activated do its work, and then it began. A soft chime, distinct from the boarding tones, pulsed from the gate's main console. The monitor in front of Veronica blinked, and the airline's internal interface shifted to an urgent red border. A message appeared in bold Sky Guardian Index alert: ethics verification required. She froze. The security officer leaned slightly to read the screen. "What's this?" he asked, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's nothing. Just a technical check." But Noah saw her hands. They were still poised over the keyboard, hesitating in a way that betrayed the truth. She knew exactly what it was. Inside the jet bridge, another chime echoed from the tablet carried by a flight attendant already on board. Through the open door of the aircraft, you could hear her murmur to someone in the cabin crew, her tone laced with surprise. Passengers noticed the pause. The woman in the crimson blazer at the front of the line lowered her phone and looked around. "Is there a delay?" she asked softly. "Not to anyone in particular." Franklin adjusted his stance, his tablet still recording. "I think you're about to see one," he said, almost under his breath. Noah's phone buzzed once in his hoodie pocket. He slipped it out just enough to read the notification. "Ethics, hold confirmed, FAA review in progress. Estimated time to clearance pending." He glanced up at Veronica, whose eyes flicked to the same message now displayed on the gate console. She knew she couldn't override it. Not here. Not without clearance from higher than her own chain of command. The security officer's radio crackled, a dispatcher's voice calling him to check the main operations desk. He stepped aside, speaking into the mic clipped to his shoulder. Whatever reply came back made his brow crease. He looked over at Noah with a trace of something different. Now not suspicion, but recognition that this situation was bigger than a boarding dispute. Behind the counter, Veronica picked up the desk phone, her voice low as she spoke into it. Noah didn't need to hear the words to guess their meaning. She was escalating, but not on her terms. The Sky Guardian Index had taken control of the escalation, and now the airline's operations and the FAA's ethics board were in the loop. Eli Moreno came closer, leaning just enough to speak quietly. "You know what you've done, right? You've stopped more than just this flight." Noah nodded once. "I know." He thought about what Arthur might be doing right now, probably seated in his home office back in Portland, the morning light catching the edge of his coffee mug, watching a live feed of the FAA operations dashboard as alerts lit up in real time. His grandfather would be calm, measured, letting the weight of the action settle before making his own calls. The boarding area seemed to slow. The steady rhythm of beeps from ticket scans had stopped entirely. The jet bridge door remained open but empty. Veronica had turned her back to the passengers, one hand on her hip as she listened to a voice on the phone. Samuel Price shifted his stance beside Noah. "This is how you hold the line without raising your voice," he said quietly. Franklin lowered his tablet for a moment, meeting Noah's gaze. "You just triggered a national freeze. People will be talking about this before we even take off." Noah took a slow breath. He felt the hum of adrenaline in his chest, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the clarity of knowing that he had chosen the moment, and the moment was now moving beyond him, a few feet away. The woman in the crimson blazer turned to the man beside her. "I just got a news alert about FAA ethics protocols. That's here, isn't it?" The man nodded. "It's here." Noah didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply slid his phone back into his pocket and waited. The Sky Guardian Index had been activated. The protocol that wasn't in the manual, the one most people didn't know existed, was now the one thing controlling Flight 726's fate. In the distance, out past the terminal windows, he could see other aircraft sitting still at their gates. Ground crews in fluorescent vests stood by equipment, waiting. Nothing was moving. The ripple had started, and it was already bigger than Gate 42. Inside, the silence of the boarding area was no longer the comfortable kind. It was the charged quiet of something about to change. From the outside, nothing about Gate 42 seemed like the epicenter of anything unusual. The sunlight still spilled across the polished floor. Coffee cups still steamed in travelers' hands, and the distant crackle of PA announcements still called out boarding groups for other gates. But inside the airline's hidden network, something enormous had begun to move. In the operations control center beneath Redwood International, monitors glowed in an ordered wall of light. Flight paths, schedules, weather overlays all lined up in precise grids. One screen at the far left blinked red, drawing the attention of a controller with a headset slung around her neck. She tapped the display. "We've got an ethics hold on Flight 726, she called out. Her voice carried just enough to make two other staff look up. Within 30 seconds, that red alert duplicated across other screens, one by one. Nearby flights with shared crew rotations or overlapping service routes were tagged for temporary hold. The Sky Guardian Index didn't just stop the flight in question. It locked down any related operations until a human review could confirm compliance. At first, it was 3 flights, then 5, then a dozen, upstairs. Veronica Keene lowered the phone, her jaw set. She glanced toward Noah, and for the first time there was no professional mask on her face, only a flicker of realization. She wasn't in control anymore. She opened her mouth, perhaps to tell him something, but the gate agent's console chimed again. A voice over the airport's internal comms came through the gate speakers. calm but unmistakably firm. "Attention crew of Flight 726. Borden is paused. Repeat, Borden is paused pending operational verification." Eli Moreno stepped closer to Noah's side. "That's the index. It's moving through the system now," he murmured. Noah gave a single nod, his eyes fixed on the wide windows beyond the boarding area. Out there, a cargo loader sat idle beside a 737. Beyond it, a row of jets waited with their boarding doors closed but their jet bridges still attached. The stillness felt strange for a busy morning. In the Air Traffic Control Center in Chicago, halfway across the country, another screen began flashing. The watch officer leaned toward it, scanning the data feed. "Sky Guardian alert. Redwood origin. Minor displacement case," she said to the supervisor beside her, "locking all related departures until the FAA clears it." It was a simple sentence, but its consequences were massive. Planes that had been given taxi clearance were told to hold position. Some were already on runways, their engines idling as the pilots relayed the unexpected instruction to passengers. In Atlanta. A pilot's voice came over the intercom of Flight 229 folks. "We've just been advised of a national operational hold for ethics verification. We'll update you as soon as we know more." Back at Gate 42, Franklin Rhodes was narrating quietly into his tablet. "I'm standing here watching an entire airline schedule start to stall because of one call. And the thing is, it's working exactly how it was designed to." Passengers around him started pulling out their own phones, checking flight status apps. The changes were visible already. Red delayed banners appeared beside departure times that had been green just minutes before. In the corner of Noah's eye, he caught the woman in the crimson blazer reading something on her screen. She looked up, scanning the room like she was trying to spot the source. Veronica crossed the boarding area to speak to the security officer again. Her voice was low, but Noah could catch the edge of it. "We can't move until the FAA clears the hold. They've already flagged the flight for review." The officer nodded slowly. "Then we wait." Noah stood quietly, hands in his hoodie pocket, feeling the small weight of the phone against his palm. The moment wasn't about him anymore. The Sky Guardian Index had shifted the focus to something much larger, an evaluation of whether the airline had acted in compliance with federal guidelines. At the Federal Aviation Administration's headquarters in Washington, D.C., Clara Huang, the deputy director, was in the middle of a budget review meeting when her aide leaned in and whispered, "We've got a live index activation on a minor displacement case. Redwood, Flight 726. Clara didn't hesitate. She rose from her seat, excusing herself from the table, and walked briskly to the operations hub. "Show me the feed," she told the nearest analyst. On the wall screen, the incident details scrolled in real-time. Passenger Noah Ellington, age 13. First class, paid ticket. Boarding pass torn by crew. Reassigned to economy without documented security or safety cause. Clara's eyes narrowed. Initiate expedited ethics review. Notify airline headquarters. This one's going to be public. At Redwood's corporate operations floor. Executives were already gathering around a conference table littered with laptops and paper cups. The airline's CEO hadn't arrived yet, but the chief operations manager was on a call with the FAA, trying to find out how long the hold would last. The answer wasn't reassuring until the ethics review is complete. Veronica returned to the gate desk, avoiding Noah's gaze now. She keyed in a few commands, but each time the screen denied the request. Across the terminal, other gates were starting to feel the ripple. Gate agents conferred with crew members, their eyes flicking toward the central departures board where more delays appeared. Eli leaned on the counter, his voice low so only Noah could hear. She's not going to win this one. The index is too far along. Even if she tried to backtrack, the record's already in the system. Noah's thoughts were steady, deliberate. He hadn't done this to win against Veronica. He had done it because the rules had been bent against him without cause, and if it could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. He thought of the younger kids in his community, the ones without a voice that could reach the FAA, without a family name that meant anything to airline executives. For them, moments like this ended with quiet acceptance and a silent walk to the back of the plane. The PA system crackled to life again. Passengers on Flight 726, we appreciate your patience. Boarding remains paused due to an operational verification process. We will provide updates as soon as possible. Franklin lifted his tablet slightly higher, making sure to catch Noah in the frame as he spoke. This is what it looks like when the Sky Guardian Index gets involved. Every delay you see on that board right now is connected to the decision made at this gate. Somewhere in the terminal. A man's voice rose in frustration his connecting flight had just been delayed. A gate agent tried to calm him, but the underlying tension was growing. The story was spreading through phone screens faster than the announcements could keep up. Noah remained still, his posture relaxed but his mind alert. Arthur's words came back to him. From all those evenings in the study, the real measure of your actions is how they stand up under scrutiny. Don't act unless you're ready to have the whole world look at what you did. The whole world might not be looking yet, but the airport was, and soon, with the help of passengers like Franklin, the story would push its way beyond Redwood's walls, out on the tarmac. The wind caught the edge of a stationary aircraft's wing, the sunlight flashing off polished metal. Inside, Gate 42 was a still point in a web of frozen motion, each thread leading to another airport, another delayed boarding call, another pilot explaining to passengers that they'd have to wait. Noah watched, and he waited too. The lever had been pulled. Now, the sky itself was holding its breath. The stillness at Gate 42 was starting to feel unnatural. Airports were meant to be places of motion wheels rolling, boarding passes scanning, jet bridges locking into place. But now the air hung heavy with that strange quiet that follows a sudden halt. Even people not on Flight 726 were lingering, pulled in by curiosity and the low hum of speculation. Noah shifted his weight and looked at the departure board again. Another 2 flights had just switched from on time to delayed. A man in a business suit muttered something into his phone, pacing by the windows. In the far corner, a family with 3 kids kept glancing toward the gate as if hoping for an announcement. Veronica Keene was back on the desk phone. Her voice was sharper now, low but with clipped edges. She glanced toward Noah twice during the call, the way you might glance toward a problem you couldn't solve without help. The security officer leaned against the wall, his eyes on the terminal walkway, clearly waiting for instructions from someone higher up. Eli Moreno was the only one moving easily. He walked to the water dispenser, filled a paper cup, and returned to stand beside Noah. "They're calling HQ," he said quietly. "You're about to hear from someone who outranks everyone in this building." Noah kept his voice low. "How long before they can clear it?" Eli shook his head. "That's not up to them anymore. It's the FAA now." As if on cue, the gate speakers clicked on. Lead crew of Flight 726, please. Report to the operations desk immediately. The voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made even passengers glance around. Veronica stepped away from the desk, smoothing her blazer, and walked briskly toward the jet bridge. 2 other crew members followed. The security officer trailed behind. Franklin Rhodes tilted his tablet toward Noah. "You're trending," he murmured. "I've been streaming for 8 minutes, and we're over 50,000 viewers. Hashtags are popping up. Marked Flight 726, hires Sky Guardian. Your name." Noah felt a small twist in his stomach. He hadn't thought about becoming a headline. This wasn't about attention. He'd wanted accountability, not fame. He looked down at his sneakers, the scuffed edges catching the light, and let the thought pass. Inside the operations room near the gate, Veronica stood with her arms crossed as a wall-mounted monitor came to life. The airline's chief operating officer appeared on the screen, a woman in her 50s with a steel-gray bob and a voice that didn't waste words. "This is Margaret Elston," she said. "I've been briefed on the Sky Guardian alert for Flight 726. Before I speak to the FAA, I want to hear directly from the lead crew on the decision to reassign a minor passenger from a paid first-class seat." Veronica began her explanation, talking about policy and guidelines. Margaret listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When Veronica finished, there was a pause. Was the passenger's ticket valid and paid for in full? Margaret asked. Yes. But, and was there a documented safety or security reason for reassigning the passenger? Veronica hesitated. No, but then this is an ethics breach under both federal and company guidelines, Margaret said. Her tone didn't rise, but the finality in it was sharp. You will hold Borden until the FAA completes their review. Do not attempt to reassign any other passengers. The call ended before Veronica could reply. Back in the gate area, the atmosphere was shifting again. Passengers had picked up enough fragments of conversation to know that someone important was involved now. Franklin continued filming, weaving in commentary about how rare it was for a Sky Guardian hold to be acknowledged by airline leadership in real time. Noah's phone buzzed again. A new message from Arthur FAA Deputy Huang is en route to FAA Ops. Expect decision within the hour. Stand firm. He pictured his grandfather's steady gaze, the way Arthur's hands folded when he was certain about a course of action. It gave Noah an anchor in the swirl of voices and movement around him. Eli leaned closer. They're rattled, he said. Most crew have never seen the index activated in person. It's one thing to read about it in training. It's another to watch it stop an entire network. Noah looked toward the glass wall. On the tarmac, ground crew stood in small groups, talking. The baggage carts were parked in neat rows. Everything waited inside the operations room. Veronica returned to the phone, this time with a softer tone. She wasn't speaking to Margaret now. She was speaking to someone from corporate compliance, answering short, precise questions. She kept glancing toward the glass window of the room, where the passengers and Noah were in view. The security officer stepped out first. He approached Noah, his voice low. Looks like you'll be staying right here in the gate area until the review's over. No one's moving you anywhere. Noah met his eyes and nodded. I wasn't planning on moving. The officer gave a faint smile before returning to his post. The minutes passed slowly, but there was a sense now that the tide had turned. The airline wasn't trying to push him away anymore. They were waiting, just like everyone else, for the FAA to make the next move. Noah pulled his hoodie tighter around his shoulders. The fabric was warm from the sunlight coming through the windows. He thought about the National Youth Policy Forum waiting for him in D.C., about the panel he was supposed to speak on tomorrow afternoon. He thought about the topic youth empowerment in civic spaces and how ironic it was that he was living the kind of example he might talk about. Franklin's voice drew him back. "You should know," the journalist said, "that by the time you land, this will be in national headlines. People care about stories like this. They care because it's so ordinary until it isn't." Noah didn't reply. He let the words sit, thinking about what it meant to become a story. Then the gate phone rang. The agent answered, listened, and then turned toward Veronica with a look of surprise. She covered the mouthpiece and said, "It's the FAA. They want to speak to the passenger directly." The room seemed to still again. Veronica's lips pressed together, but she gestured toward Noah. "He's right there." The agent held out the phone. "They're ready for you." Noah took it, the smooth receiver cool against his ear. "This is Noah Ellington." A woman's voice came through, calm and precise. "Noah, this is Clara Huang, Deputy Director at the FAA. I want you to know that we've reviewed the initial report. You've done exactly what the index was designed for. We're finalizing our findings now. You'll have an update shortly. And thank you for standing firm." "Thank you," Noah said simply. He handed the phone back and sat down in one of the waiting area chairs, feeling the quiet weight of the moment. Whatever happened next, the decision was already in motion, and the skies, for now, were still holding their breath. The phone call ended, and for a few long moments, the air at Gate 42 seemed to thicken. Everyone's eyes were on the gate desk now, waiting for someone to make the next move. Noah sat still, his elbows resting on his knees, feeling the hum of his own heartbeat in the tips of his fingers. Veronica Keene returned from the operations room, her steps measured, her face unreadable. She spoke briefly to the gate agent, who nodded and began typing into the terminal. Then Veronica turned toward the waiting passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice calm but tight. "We've received clearance from the FAA to continue boarding Flight 726. However, there will be adjustments to our boarding process. We appreciate your patience as we complete the necessary documentation." Her gaze swept the room, lingering for the briefest moment on Noah. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just acknowledged his presence with the smallest tilt of her head. A murmur ran through the passengers. People shifted in their seats. Phones lifted to check departure apps again. A few looked relieved. Others, annoyed by the delay, muttered under their breath. The gate agent picked up the intercom. "We will now begin boarding Flight 726 to Washington. D.C., starting with pre-boarding passengers and those seated in first class." Franklin Rhodes lowered his tablet just enough to glance at Noah. "You're going aboard now," he said quietly, "but don't think for a second this story is over. Not by a long shot." Noah rose from his seat. The security officer gave him a subtle nod as he stepped into the short line forming for first-class boarding. Samuel Price moved ahead, giving Noah a quick pat on the shoulder in passing. As he approached the gate desk, Veronica extended her hand for his boarding pass. For a moment, the memory of her tearing the first one flickered in his mind. But now, she scanned it without comment, the small green light flashing approval. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Ellington," she said, her voice neutral. Noah met her eyes briefly. "I will." He stepped into the jet bridge, the cool, filtered air carrying a faint tang of jet fuel. The low rumble of the engines somewhere beyond the fuselage vibrated through the narrow walkway. Ahead, a flight attendant in a Navy uniform not Eli stood at the aircraft door, greeting passengers with a polite smile. Inside, first class was quiet, the leather seats gleaming under soft overhead lights. Noah found his seat 2A and slid his backpack under the seat in front of him. The seat beside him was empty for now. He pulled out his phone, tapping a quick message to Arthur Boarding. FAA cleared, boarding first class. Almost immediately, Arthur replied, "Good. Eyes open. They may test you again." Eli appeared a moment later, moving down the aisle to stow a bag in the overhead compartment. He caught Noah's eye and gave a quick nod, as if to say, "You made it." Then he continued toward the galley. Veronica entered the cabin shortly afterward, moving with professional precision as she checked the overhead bins and greeted passengers. Her demeanor hadn't softened, but there was a subtle shift, less command, more containment. As boarding continued, Noah noticed Franklin taking a seat in 3C, still holding his tablet. Samuel Price settled in 4A, directly behind Noah. The woman in the crimson blazer took the aisle seat across from him. When the last of the passengers in first class had settled, the cabin door closed with a solid thud. The aircraft pushed back from the gate, and the soft whine of the engines deepened as they powered up for taxi. The captain's voice came over the PA. "Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Jordan Reeves. We apologize for the delay in departure. We've now been cleared to proceed to Washington, D.R.C., with an updated arrival time expected to be approximately 45 minutes later than scheduled. Thank you for your patience." The seatbelt signs lit up. Noah leaned back, exhaling slowly. He could feel the tension in his shoulders begin to ease, but only slightly. He knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of the second act. The plane rolled toward the runway, engines spooling higher. As they lifted into the air, the world outside the window tilted and fell away. The patchwork of tarmac and terminal buildings shrinking beneath a blanket of late morning haze. At cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign chimed off. Veronica and Eli moved through the cabin, starting drink service. Eli paused at Noah's seat. "Water, juice?" "Water's fine," Noah said. Eli handed him a glass, leaning closer. "Just so you know, there's talk in the galley. Some crew think the FAA's going to make an example out of this flight. You may be asked more questions before we land." Noah sipped the water, the coolness grounding him. "I'm ready." Veronica approached the row, offering drinks to Franklin and the woman in the crimson blazer. She didn't look at Noah directly, but he could feel the awareness there, the shared understanding that their earlier clash had rippled far beyond this cabin. Halfway through the service, a chime sounded from the galley. Eli stepped away to answer it, disappearing behind the curtain. When he returned, his expression was thoughtful. "That was the cockpit," he said quietly as he leaned toward Noah. "They've been patched through to FAA ops mid-flight. That doesn't happen unless something's still in motion." Noah's grip tightened slightly on the glass. "Still in motion," how Eli shook his head. "Don't know yet, but they asked for a full report from the lead crew before landing. That means the decision isn't fully closed." Franklin, overhearing, glanced over from his seat. "If they're still asking questions, it means they're deciding whether this becomes a test case for the index. If it does, you're not just a passenger anymore, you're Exhibit A." Noah turned to the window. the endless white clouds below reflecting sunlight into the cabin. Somewhere out there. Arthur was watching the same progress on a tracking screen, somewhere in Washington. Clara Huang was reviewing the details of a file with his name on it. The hum of the engines filled the silence between thoughts. He let his mind trace the chain of events, the torn boarding pass, the decision to call the index, the ripples through the network, the corporate intervention, the FAA's voice in his ear. Every moment had built to this altitude, this thin line between calm and confrontation. The seatbelt sign chimed on again as the captain announced turbulence ahead. The cabin crew secured the galley. Veronica passed through the aisle, her eyes briefly meeting Noah's. There was no hostility there now, just a kind of restrained calculation, as if she were already preparing for whatever came next. Noah adjusted his seatbelt, the faint vibration of turbulence shivering through the floor. He took another sip of water, his mind steadying on the truth that had carried him this far. The measure of an action wasn't in how loud it was, but in how deeply it held when the weight pressed down. They were still in the air. The decision was still forming, and whatever came next, he would face it head on. The hum of the engines had become a steady backdrop, a sound that seemed to vibrate through Noah's bones. Outside his window, the sky stretched in an unbroken sweep of pale blue, with clouds scattered far below like islands on a white sea. From the outside, everything about this flight looked peaceful. Inside, Noah could feel the threads tightening again. Eli returned from the galley with a look that was part focus, part unease. He crouched slightly beside Noah's seat to keep his voice low. The cockpit's still on with FRA ops. They're asking for details on passenger interactions before takeoff. Noah kept his voice steady. That means they're building a record, every move, every word. Eli nodded. They'll probably want to hear from you again before we land. Just be ready. 2 rows back, Franklin Rhodes was still working his tablet. The screen angled so the camera lens caught both his face and the aisle behind him. He wasn't speaking loudly, but the subtle movements of his mouth told Noah he was narrating. Franklin had the kind of calm, deliberate delivery that carried weight when it went viral. Noah could almost hear the headlines forming. The seatbelt light switched off again. Veronica emerged from the galley, her service tray balanced neatly. She made her way down the aisle, stopping briefly to check on a passenger in 1C who had pressed the call button. When she reached Noah's row, she didn't linger, but her eyes flicked to his, as if assessing whether to engage. She moved on without a word. Noah took a sip of his water. The glass was cool in his hand, the condensation dampening his fingertips. He thought of Arthur's last text, "They may test you again," and knew this was that moment in slow motion. A test wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was the quiet pressure to stay still while the system decided what to do with you. Half an hour into the flight, a soft chime sounded over the intercom. The captain's voice followed, steady but with a tone that made people look up. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reeves. We've received an in-flight operational directive from the FAA. We will be making an internal review while en route. We ask that passengers remain seated unless otherwise instructed. We appreciate your cooperation." That wasn't standard. Most passengers didn't know it, but Noah caught the difference instantly. The FAA wasn't waiting until landing. They were acting now. Eli appeared again, this time with a clipboard in hand. He stopped at Noah's seat. "They're asking you to provide a statement, in writing, while we're still airborne. Captain's orders. the forms from FAA Ops. Noah took the clipboard. The top of the page bore the Sky Guardian Index emblem, a stylized wing inside a shield, along with his name, the flight number, and the phrase Passenger Ethics Displacement Report. He scanned the questions. Describe the sequence of events leading to your seat reassignment. Include all verbal interactions with crew. List any witnesses present. He started writing. His pen moved evenly, each letter deliberate. He included the torn boarding pass, the absence of a documented reason, the fact that he was a minor passenger traveling with a fully paid first-class ticket. He listed witnesses, Franklin Rhodes in 3C, Samuel Price in 4A, the woman in the crimson blazer whose name he didn't know. He wrote without embellishment, letting the facts speak. By the time he handed the clipboard back, Veronica was standing at the front of the cabin speaking softly with another crew member. Eli delivered the form to the cockpit, disappearing through the reinforced door. Minutes later, Franklin leaned forward in his seat, catching Noah's attention. "I just got a tip from a contact at the FAA," he said quietly. "They're considering using this incident to trigger a procedural overhaul on minor passenger rights. If they do, your name could be attached to it as in officially. Are you ready for that?" Noah met his gaze. If it means no one else has to go through this, yes. Franklin gave a short nod, his expression one of professional respect. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane entered a stretch of thinner cloud cover. Outside the window, sunlight streamed through gaps, throwing moving patterns across the aisle. The sound of the engines shifted subtly as the aircraft adjusted altitude. Then Eli returned, his expression unreadable. "The FAA wants to speak with you over secure comm. Captain Reeves is patching you through from the cockpit." Noah rose, the air in the cabin feeling slightly heavier now. He followed Eli past first class, past the galley, to the cockpit door. The captain himself opened it, stepping aside so Noah could see the communications handset mounted to the panel. "This line's hot to FAA Ops," Captain Reeves said. "Clara Huang is on." Noah took the handset. "This is Noah Ellington." Clara's voice came through, steady and precise. "Noah, I've reviewed your written statement and corroborating witness notes. You've confirmed what the index flagged that there was no procedural justification for your seat reassignment. I need to inform you that this incident meets the criteria for an expedited ethics citation. That means the airline will face immediate penalties, and this case will be logged as precedent." Noah listened without interrupting. "I also want you to know," Clara continued, "that your composure during this process is part of why the review has gone this smoothly. I'll be speaking to your grandfather when we land. In the meantime, the crew has been advised to ensure your safe and uninterrupted travel for the remainder of this flight." "Understood," Noah said. When he handed the handset back, the captain gave him a brief nod of approval. "You've handled yourself well, son." Noah returned to his seat, feeling the cabin's gaze shift subtly toward him. Word was traveling, even without announcements. Franklin gave him a thumbs up from across the aisle. Samuel Price offered a quiet, "good job" as Noah passed. As he settled back into 2A, the engine's steady hum seemed to take on a different note, less background, more like a current carrying them toward the inevitable landing where the rest of the consequences would unfold. Veronica passed by one more time, her voice carefully professional. "Can I get you anything else?" "Mr. Ellington?" Noah looked up at her. "No, thank you." She moved on, but the exchange felt like a small, unspoken acknowledgement. They both knew the story had already left this cabin and was moving through channels neither could control. Outside, the clouds began to thin, revealing the patchwork of land below. The sun caught the wing, sending a flash of light across Noah's window. They were 30,000 feet up, but the real ground shift was happening in the corridors of policy and accountability far below. The first sign they were nearing Washington came with the captain's calm voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into D.C. Weather at our arrival time is clear skies and light winds. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened." The seatbelt sign chimed on, and the subtle downward tilt of the cabin told Noah they were dropping altitude. Outside his window, the cloud layer had broken into wisps, revealing slivers of green farmland and winding rivers below. But inside, the tension hadn't eased. If anything, it had sharpened. Eli moved down the aisle one last time, checking that bags were secured and seats upright. When he reached Noah, he lowered his voice. "Heads up, you've got company waiting at the gate. FAA reps, media, maybe corporate. It's going to be crowded." Noah gave a small nod. "Expected it." From the row behind, Samuel Price leaned forward just enough for his voice to carry. "They'll try to spin this. Remember, you hold the facts. Don't let them twist it." Noah glanced over his shoulder and gave the older man a quiet look of thanks. The descent was smooth, the engines humming at a slightly lower pitch. The light in the cabin shifted as the sun slanted in through the windows, casting warm stripes across the aisle. Noah's mind ran through what might happen next: questions, cameras, maybe even a press scrum. He'd seen it happen to Arthur plenty of times, but this was different. This time, he was the one stepping off the plane with the story that people already thought they knew. Captain Reeves came on again. "We've been advised that, upon arrival, certain passengers will be met by officials. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off and we are fully parked at the gate." His tone was deliberately even, but Noah caught the implication the FAA wasn't just here for a quiet chat. The landing gear lowered with a deep, mechanical thud. The flaps adjusted, and the aircraft dipped gracefully toward the runway. A faint vibration ran through the floor as they touched down, tires squealing lightly against the tarmac. The roar of reverse thrust filled the cabin before easing into a gentle roll toward the terminal. As they taxied, Noah could see flashing lights on the tarmac ahead, not emergency lights, but the unmistakable blink of official vehicles. A black SUV was parked near the gate, flanked by 2 airport security cars. Eli stopped by Noah's seat again, his tone steady. "They'll probably ask you to deplane before most passengers. FAA likes to move fast." Veronica was at the front of the cabin, speaking quietly to a man in a charcoal suit who had boarded from the jet bridge just as they pulled in. His ID badge caught the light FAA Investigations Division. She handed him a tablet, and he began scrolling. When the aircraft came to a stop and the seatbelt sign clicked off, the man in the charcoal suit stepped into the aisle. "Mr. Noah Ellington," he said. Noah stood. "Yes, I'm Aaron Klein, FAA. If you'll come with me, please." His tone wasn't unfriendly, but it carried authority. As Noah gathered his backpack, Franklin Rhodes angled his tablet to capture the moment, his voice low but audible. "This is Noah Ellington, the passenger at the center of the Sky Guardian Index activation on Flight 726. We've just landed, and FAA officials are here at the gate." Samuel Price gave Noah a short nod as he passed. The woman in the crimson blazer whispered something under her breath. Maybe encouragement, maybe relief, but Noah didn't catch the words. In the jet bridge, the temperature shifted to a cooler, more sterile air. The hum of the terminal beyond was louder now. Ahead, Clara Huang waited, flanked by 2 more FAA staff and a pair of uniformed airport officers. "Noah," she said, stepping forward. "We'll escort you to a private conference room for a brief follow-up. Your grandfather has been informed and will meet us there." Her presence was calm, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the gate area where passengers were beginning to spill into the terminal, some craning their necks to see what was happening. The walk to the conference room was short but deliberate. Media crews had already gathered near the main concourse, their cameras lifting as the small FAA escort passed. Noah could hear the buzz of questions behind him. Is that the kid from the flight? What happened on board? But no one approached, the officers forming a quiet barrier. Inside the conference room, the noise of the terminal faded. Arthur was already there, standing near the far wall in a dark suit. His eyes softened the moment they landed on Noah. "You did well," Arthur said, his voice low but steady. Noah set his backpack down and took a seat across from Clara. A glass of water was placed in front of him. "This won't take long," Clara said. "We've completed our preliminary review. The airline has been cited for an ethics violation under the Minor Passenger Protection Provision. That triggers an immediate freeze on certain operations until compliance measures are met. A freeze that, given their current schedule, amounts to roughly $1.7 billion in halted revenue." Arthur's eyebrows lifted slightly, but his expression remained otherwise calm. Clara continued. "We will issue a public statement later today. Your role in activating the index will be part of the record. We'd like to confirm you're comfortable with your name being attached to the reform proposal that follows." Noah nodded. "Yes." Arthur leaned forward slightly. "And I assume the proposal will close the loophole that allowed this kind of reassignment without documented cause." "It will," Clara said. "In fact, the language is already being drafted." The conversation moved quickly from there, signatures on statements, verification of witness contact information, a brief review of the airline's internal communications log. Noah answered each question steadily, his voice clear. When it was done, Clara rose. "We'll take it from here. You've done more than most adults would have in your position." Arthur placed a hand on Noah's shoulder as they stepped back into the terminal. The media was still there, but FAA staff guided them down a side corridor toward a quieter exit. As they walked, Noah glanced back toward the main concourse. Through the glass, he could see the tail of the aircraft still at the gate, the Sky Guardian emblem, now a symbol he'd never forget. He knew the story was already bigger than him, already moving into places he couldn't see. But he also knew something else. This wasn't just a personal victory. It was a line in the sand, 30,000 feet above the ground. That would change how the skies treated people like him. By the time Noah and Arthur stepped out of the side corridor into the quieter arrivals hall, his phone was already vibrating with notifications. News alerts, messages from classmates, even a few from numbers he didn't recognize. The Sky Guardian Index case from Flight 726 was trending, and his name was in the headlines. Arthur glanced at the screen as they walked toward the car waiting outside. "Ignore it for now," he said. "The noise will be deafening. You'll have time to answer when you're ready." But even ignoring it wasn't simple. Screens in the terminal showed news anchors discussing the FAA's penalty against the airline. Clips from Franklin Rhodes's in-flight live stream were already in circulation. One still shot of Noah holding the clipboard mid-flight had become the image of the story. Outside, the sun was sharp, the air warmer than it had been in Oregon. The black SUV Arthur had arranged was parked at the curb. The driver opened the rear door, and as Noah slid in, he caught sight of a crowd gathering at the far end of the terminal entrance cameras. Microphones, boom mics. They'd found out which door he was using. The SUV pulled away before the reporters could reach them. But not before Noah caught a fragment of shouted questions. Noah, how did it feel? Do you think the FAA overreacted? Is this about race? Arthur closed the privacy divider between them and the driver. They'll keep pressing. Some will want your story. Others will want to poke holes in it. Our job is to make sure they hear the truth before the distortions take root. Noah leaned back against the seat, the city rolling past in flashes of sunlight and shadow. I didn't expect it to be this fast. Arthur's eyes softened. It's always fast when the story challenges a system that doesn't like to be challenged. At their hotel, the lobby was already busy with guests watching the news feed. As they crossed toward the elevators, Noah heard his name again, not whispered, but spoken openly by strangers. One woman in business attire nodded to him as they passed. "Good work," she said quietly, before continuing on. In the suite, Arthur set his briefcase on the table and powered up his laptop. "Clara will send over the FAA's public statement draft for us to review. There's also interest from 2 national morning shows. I told them no until we've had time to think." Noah dropped his backpack on the couch and sat beside it. "I'm not sure I want to be on TV." "You don't have to," Arthur said, looking over the top of his glasses. "But you should know this isn't just about your seat anymore. The public sees a face to attach to the issue. Whether we like it or not, you're in the middle of a policy debate that will shape aviation for years." Noah thought about that, about the idea of being more than just himself in other people's eyes. "I just wanted them to follow the rules. I didn't want to be a symbol." Arthur closed the laptop. Symbols aren't chosen by the people they represent, but they can choose what kind of symbol they'll be. The rest of the afternoon moved in a blur, a call from Clara confirming that the FAA's statement would be released in the next hour, followed by an email from a congressional staffer requesting a meeting. Arthur fielded most of it, but he kept Noah in the loop, reading him the key parts of each message. When the statement finally went live, the coverage exploded. The FAA confirmed the $1, $7 billion freeze on the airline's operations pending compliance. Cited Flight 726 as the triggering incident, and named Noah Ellington as the passenger whose actions upheld the ethical standards and legal protections owed to all travelers, especially minors. The statement also mentioned that the incident would form the basis of the Ellington Accord, a proposed addition to the minor passenger protection provision that would close the loophole allowing undocumented seat reassignments. Within minutes, the story was everywhere. Some commentators praised Noah's calm and persistence. Others questioned whether the penalty was too harsh, framing it as an overreach by the FAA. Social media split into threads of support, skepticism, and debate over the role of the Sky Guardian Index in enforcing policy. From the hotel suite window, Noah could see the lights of camera crews gathering outside. Franklin Rhodes had texted Arthur asking for a follow-up interview, Samuel Price had sent a short message, "Stand firm," from his own hotel. Even Eli Moreno had written, "Hope you're okay. It's been chaos here since we landed." By evening, Arthur had arranged for dinner in a private room downstairs to avoid the lobby crowd, over plates of pasta and quiet conversation. Arthur spoke about the days ahead. The airline will try to salvage its reputation. They may reach out with an apology or an offer. You need to decide in advance how you'll respond. Noah twirled his fork, thinking, if they apologize, I'll accept it. But if they try to buy me off to stay quiet, Arthur smiled faintly. Then they'll find they picked the wrong Ellington to pressure. Later that night, alone in his room, Noah sat on the bed scrolling through messages. One caught his eye from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Not everyone is happy about what you've started." He stared at it for a long moment before locking the phone. Somewhere, he knew, there were people who wanted this to end before it reshaped anything. But the decision to keep going, to see it through, was already made. Down the hall, Arthur was on another call, his voice low but urgent. Noah couldn't make out the words, but he could guess the topic: tomorrow's meeting with the Congressional Committee staffer. In the quiet, Noah felt the weight settle differently now. It wasn't the pressure of being in trouble anymore. It was the gravity of having pushed a boulder that had started to roll, knowing it wouldn't stop without changing the landscape entirely. The next morning, Washington woke under a pale gray sky. The streets outside the hotel bustled with early commuters, their footsteps echoing off the stone facades of government buildings, from the window of the SUV. Noah watched it all slide past the monuments, the flags, the steady stream of people moving with purpose. Arthur sat beside him, reviewing a short briefing document. "Remember, you're not here to argue policy details. You're here to tell the truth about what happened. Keep your voice steady, answer directly, and don't get drawn into their language traps." Noah nodded. His hands were loosely clasped in his lap, but his mind kept circling back to that text from the unknown number last night. He hadn't shown it to Arthur. Not yet. The SUV stopped at the side entrance of a sandstone building with tall windows and a line of small brass plaques by the door. Inside, a staffer with a congressional ID badge met them. She introduced herself as Carla and led them down a long hallway lined with portraits of past committee chairs. The hearing room wasn't as large as Noah had imagined, but it was filled with an undeniable energy. At one end, a row of committee members sat behind a curved desk. To one side, two men in dark suits and a woman in a navy sheath dress occupied a reserved table, the airline's lobby team. Their eyes followed Noah as he entered. Clara Huang was already in the room, speaking with a committee member. She gave Noah a brief nod of acknowledgement as Carla guided him to his seat at the witness table. Arthur sat just behind him. The committee chair, Representative Elaine Foster, adjusted her glasses and tapped her microphone. "We'll come to order. This is a closed session regarding the FAA's enforcement action against North Pacific Airways following the events aboard Flight 726. Her gaze landed on Noah. "Mr. Ellington, thank you for being here." Noah straightened. "Thank you for having me." Foster gestured for him to begin. "Please recount the events from your perspective." He told it simply, the boarding pass torn without explanation, the reassignment to a different seat, the lack of documented cause, the conversation with Eli, the written statement mid-flight. As he spoke, the room was quiet except for the scratch of pens. Even the airline's lobbyists seemed to still, listening for any inconsistency they could use later. When he finished, Foster leaned forward. "Mr. Ellington, at any point did you raise your voice or physically resist the crew's instructions?" Noah said evenly, "I followed every instruction I was given. I only asked for the reason behind the reassignment, and none was provided." A ripple passed through the committee members. Foster made a note. "Thank you." The next questions came from a representative from Texas, his tone more skeptical. "Son, do you understand the scale of the penalty your case triggered? $1.7 billion frozen? Some might say that's disproportionate for a seat change." Noah met his eyes. "I understand the scale, but I also understand the rules were written to protect passengers, especially minors. If rules can be ignored without consequence, they're not rules at all." Arthur's lips pressed together behind him, not in disapproval, but in the faintest shadow of pride. The lobbyists were given a chance to respond. The woman in navy, introducing herself as Dana Price, began. "While we regret the inconvenience to Mr. Ellington, we believe the FAA's response was excessive. Flight crews must make quick decisions for operational efficiency, and the Sky Guardian Index should not be used to penalize minor procedural deviations." Foster's gaze sharpened. "You call this a minor procedural deviation?" Price's voice stayed smooth. "Yes, Madam Chair." The passenger was seated in a different seat, still in first class. The crew acted within their discretion to accommodate another traveler with an urgent connection. Noah's voice cut in before he could second-guess himself. "If that's true, why wasn't it documented, and why was my boarding pass torn before I could even ask why the room went quiet?" Price's expression tightened, but she didn't answer directly. Foster turned back to Noah. "Mr. Ellington, thank you. Your testimony will be entered into the record. The committee will review all supporting documentation, including the in-flight statement you provided." When the session ended, Noah and Arthur stepped into the hallway. Clara joined them, her expression unreadable until they reached a quieter corner. "You handled that perfectly," she said, "but be prepared the airline isn't going to back down. They've already hinted at challenging the FAA's authority in court." Arthur's voice was dry. "They can try. The facts aren't on their side." Noah was about to respond when his phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time, the message was shorter. "Stop now, or it gets personal." He slipped the phone into his pocket without reacting, but his mind was already racing. Whoever was behind this didn't just want to protect the airline's reputation, they wanted to scare him into silence. Arthur noticed the flicker in his eyes. Something wrong. "Not yet," Noah said, his voice measured, "but I think we're going to find out soon." As they left the building, the air felt heavier, the gray sky pressing down like a lid. In the distance, the faint sound of a protest chant carried across the plaza. Noah couldn't make out the words, but he didn't need to. The fight over Flight 726 had already spilled beyond conference rooms and terminals. It was in the streets now, and there was no putting it back in the bottle. By late afternoon, the air in Washington carried a restless hum. News vans lined the street outside the hotel, their antennas pointed skyward. The committee session had leaked before they even made it back, and clips of Noah's exchange with the airline lobbyist were already playing on national broadcasts. Arthur closed the curtains in their suite before sitting down at the table with a fresh pot of coffee. "It's out there now," he said. "Every word. They're either praising you for your composure or accusing you of being coached." Noah sat on the couch, his phone heavy in his hand. The message from earlier burned in his thoughts. Stop now, or it gets personal. He'd kept it to himself, but it was getting harder to ignore. A knock sounded at the door. Arthur glanced through the peephole before opening it to Clara Huang. She stepped in quickly, closing the door behind her. "We've got a problem," she said. "The airline filed an emergency motion in federal court this morning, challenging the FAA's authority to enforce the Sky Guardian Index freeze. They're claiming you were an instigator, not a victim." Arthur's jaw tightened. On what grounds they're using the lobbyists' framing that the reassignment was operational, not discriminatory, and that you provoked the escalation to avoid compliance with the crew's orders. Noah blinked. "That's not what happened." "I know," Clara said, her tone sharp with certainty. "But they've also leaked selected portions of the cabin crew's statements to the press. The parts they left out just happen to be the ones that match your account." Arthur rubbed his forehead. "So, they're trying to win this in public opinion while it moves through the courts." Clara nodded. "And there's something else. The threats you've been getting, they've started surfacing online. Screenshots are circulating. People are speculating about whether they're real or staged." Noah felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "I didn't share those with anyone. They didn't have to come from you," Clara said. "If the sender wants to intimidate you, letting them leak serves the same purpose." Arthur turned to Noah. "You should have told me. I didn't want to make it bigger," Noah said quietly. "I thought if I ignored them, they'd stop." Arthur's eyes softened. "That's not how these people work." The room fell silent for a moment. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Clara broke the quiet. "We're moving you both to a secure location tonight. The FAA doesn't take risks with witnesses in active enforcement cases, especially when the stakes are this high." The relocation happened quickly. A black sedan with tinted windows pulled into the hotel's underground garage. By nightfall, Noah and Arthur were in a furnished apartment 3 blocks from the FAA's main office, the curtains drawn tight. Dinner was quiet, the sound of utensils on plates filling the space where conversation might have been. Finally, Noah spoke. "Do you think they can win in court?" Arthur chewed thoughtfully before answering. "They can delay, they can make noise, but winning, not if the facts hold." "And if they don't?" Noah asked. Arthur set his fork down. "Then we make sure they do." The next morning brought another wave of headlines. Overnight, a protest had formed outside the airline's headquarters in Seattle. Images of handmade signs. "Follow your own rules. Passengers are not pawns." No more quiet bias flooded social media, but there were counter voices too. Anonymous accounts accusing Noah of being a plant for the FAA. Hashtags calling the penalty economic sabotage. Arthur scrolled through them without comment. Clara arrived mid-morning with news. "The judge has scheduled a preliminary hearing for tomorrow. The FAA will argue that the freeze stays in place. The airline will push for an immediate lift. They've subpoenaed you." "Noah." Noah's pulse quickened. "For what they want to question you under oath about your intent when you filed that statement on the flight." Arthur's voice was calm, but the edge in it was clear. "They're fishing. They hope to trip him up on something irrelevant." Clara nodded. "Which is why I'll be there, along with FAA counsel. But you need to be ready. They'll come at you hard. They'll try to make you doubt what you saw, what you experienced. Don't give them that opening." That night, Noah couldn't sleep. The apartment was too quiet, the air too still. He found himself pacing, replaying every detail of the flight in his mind, the sound of the boarding pass tearing, the look in Veronica Keene's eyes, the way Eli had quietly slipped him that clipboard. He wondered if Eli was okay, or if the crew had been pulled into the airline's defense strategy against their will. At some point, he ended up by the window, looking out at the distant glow of the Capitol dome. Arthur joined him there, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You know," Arthur said, "when I was in the Senate, I saw a lot of people break under pressure. Most of the time, it wasn't because they were wrong. It was because they let the other side decide the terms of the fight." Noah took the mug. "So what do? You decide your own terms. You tell the truth. And you remember that you didn't start this, but you can damn well finish it." They stood there in the quiet for a while, the weight of what was coming settling between them. Tomorrow, the fight would move into a courtroom. The cameras would be waiting. The lobbyists would be ready. And the boy who just wanted his seat back would have to stand his ground against a billion-dollar machine. The courthouse steps were crowded before the sun had fully risen. Reporters clustered behind barricades, camera lenses catching every movement of the small group that approached from the side entrance. Noah walked between Arthur and Clara, his tie slightly askew, his heartbeat a steady drum in his ears. Inside, the courtroom felt colder than he expected. High ceilings and wood-paneled walls gave it a weight that pressed down on everyone in the room. The airline's attorneys occupied the table to the right, their expressions carefully neutral. Dana Price was there, her gaze fixed straight ahead. The judge, a silver-haired woman with a voice that carried without effort, called the session to order. The FAA's counsel began, outlining the facts, the violation of documented seating rules, the tearing of a miner's boarding pass without cause, the absence of any operational emergency, and the integrity of the Sky Guardian Index as a regulatory tool. When the airline's turn came, their lead attorney leaned hard into their narrative. This was not discrimination. This was discretion. A crew member made a call to accommodate a traveler with an urgent international connection. No harm was intended, and none was done. Clara exchanged a glance with Arthur. Both knew where this was headed the moment they would try to undermine Noah directly. Sure enough, the attorney turned toward him. "Mr. Ellington, you had a seat in first class for the entirety of the flight. Did you not?" "Yes," Noah said evenly. "And you were provided the same meal service and amenities as the other passengers?" "Yes." "Then isn't it true that your only complaint is about a specific seat location? Not the class of service?" Noah met the man's eyes. "It's not about where I sat. It's about why I was moved and the fact that no one would tell me the reason or write it down like they're supposed to. Rules exist for a reason. If you can ignore them for a seat, you can ignore them for anything." The attorney hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, and that was all Noah needed to see. When both sides had finished, the judge called a recess. Noah sat in the hallway with Arthur and Clara, the muffled hum of voices coming from every direction. Arthur's hand rested lightly on his shoulder. "You did exactly what you needed to." An hour later, they were called back in. The judge's ruling was firm. The FAA's freeze would remain in place until the airline complied fully with all regulations and submitted to an independent audit of its crew training procedures. The court rejected the airline's motion to lift the penalty. In the gallery, a murmur swelled, then quieted under the judge's final words. This case is a reminder that the smallest actions tearing a boarding pass, avoiding a question, can erode the public trust if left unchecked. It is the responsibility of all parties in the aviation industry to uphold both the letter and the spirit of their own policies. Outside, the crowd was electric. Reporters shouted questions. Clara confirmed the ruling in a short, precise statement to the press, then ushered Noah and Arthur into a waiting car before the chaos swallowed them. 2 weeks later, the Ellington Accord was signed into law. It closed the loophole that had allowed undocumented seat reassignments, expanded protections for minors traveling alone, and mandated real-time Sky Guardian Index oversight on all domestic flights. The day the accord took effect, Noah found himself back at an airport. This time, he wasn't flying to testify or defend himself. He was going to visit his cousin in Chicago. Arthur came along, carrying nothing but a small leather briefcase. At the gate, the boarding agent scanned Noah's pass and smiled. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Ellington. Your seat is 3A. On board." Noah settled into his seat. It wasn't about the legroom or the view. It was the quiet certainty that no one could take it without reason. As the last passengers boarded, a flight attendant paused by his row. She was younger than Veronica Keene had been, her smile genuine. "I just wanted to say," she said softly, "what you did, it made a difference for a lot of us. Crew and passengers both." Noah felt a warmth in his chest he couldn't quite name. "Thank you," he said. As the plane taxied, Arthur leaned over. "You realize you'll probably keep getting recognized for this for a while?" "I guess so," Noah replied. He looked out the window at the runway stretching ahead. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe it's good to remember why rules matter." The engines roared, the plane lifted, and the city fell away beneath them. Noah sat back, the hum of the cabin wrapping around him. Somewhere below, policies were being rewritten, training manuals updated, flights prepared under a new standard that bore his name. It had started with a torn boarding pass and a refusal to accept silence for an answer. It had ended here not with a fight, but with a quiet, steady certainty. And for Noah Ellington, that was enough. And so, what began as a torn boarding pass became something far greater. Noah Ellington didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight with his fists. He fought with truth, and he won. Because of him, the rules are stronger. The Ellington Accord now protects every passenger, especially those who might otherwise be ignored. But beyond the policies and headlines, this is a reminder dignity is not optional. Respect is not negotiable. And the quietest voices can echo the loudest when they speak the truth. To the crews who treat every passenger with fairness, you are the heart of aviation. To those who still think prejudice can hide in small decisions, the world is watching. This story is not just Noah's. It belongs to anyone who has been told they don't belong, and everyone who refused to accept that answer. If this touched you, if it made you think, or if it reminded you why fairness matters, then like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Because the next flight, it could be yours.